All right, so you guys have been sending in a bunch of articles about Elevation Capital,
Right.
this VC firm, right? And it looks like things are getting kind of interesting over there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It seems like some shuffling at the top. Both the principal, Amit Agarwal, and partner and COO, Vivek Mathur, are heading out.
Hmm.
So let's dive into this and see what we can uncover.
Sounds good.
What I think is fascinating is this isn't just some like isolated incident, you know,
Right.
at Elevation. We're actually seeing similar high-level departures at other major firms.
Yeah, like Peak XV,
Exactly.
formerly Sequoia in India.
Yeah. It really makes you wonder, like, is this just normal churn or is there something bigger happening in the Indian VC landscape?
Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's break it down. First, we've got Amit Agarwal. This guy has a resume that reads like a business school fantasy. Strategic planning at Facebook, then leading Quobo, a consumer IoT venture under the Hero Group, and now he's been at Elevation focusing on early stage investments.
Wow.
So,
That's quite a resume.
yeah.
And that's what makes his departure so intriguing, right?
Yeah.
You see someone with that breadth of experience,
Mhm.
someone who clearly isn't afraid to take risks and explore different avenues.
Right.
And you have to wonder, what's next for him?
Yeah.
Is this a classic VC turned entrepreneur story in the making?
Yeah. The article even speculates that he might be starting his own company,
Oh, wow.
which would make sense, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, he's got the investment expertise. He's seen firsthand what it takes to build successful startups.
Right.
And now maybe he just wants to be the one calling the shots.
It wouldn't be surprising. I think we're seeing this trend more and more.
Mm-hmm.
Top VC talent leaving to launch their own ventures or stepping into leadership roles at high-growth startups,
Right.
almost as if they're taking all that knowledge that they've gained from evaluating and advising companies
Right.
and applying it to their own endeavors.
Yeah. It's really interesting. So that's kind of one side of the coin. You've got like the relative newcomer making this bold move. But then you've got Vivek Mathur, who has been with Elevation Capital for 14 years,
Wow. 14
which
years.
is practically an eternity in the fast-paced world of venture capital.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why Mathur's exit is particularly noteworthy. I mean,
Yeah.
we're not just talking about any position here. This is the COO.
Right.
Someone in that role, especially after being there for 14 years, has their fingerprints all over the firm's operational model.
Right.
So when a COO of that stature departs, you have to wonder if Elevation is about to undergo some major internal shifts.
It makes you think, right, is this a sign that they're looking to shake things up, maybe bring in a new COO with a different approach? Or could it be a sign of something more fundamental, like a change in their investment philosophy or their overall strategy?
Yeah. You got to wonder, with the COO leaving, is Elevation Capital about to revamp its operational model? I mean, Miter was there for 14 years. He helped build their systems. This might signal a move towards a more data-driven approach, or perhaps they're streamlining to handle a larger volume of deals.
That's a great point. And think about all the institutional knowledge that walks out the door when someone like Mathur leaves. He's seen the Indian startup ecosystem evolve firsthand. He's built relationships with countless founders and investors. That's not something you can easily replace.
And that's precisely what makes these two departures, happening within such a short span of time, so significant. Agarwal representing the new guard, venturing out on his own, and Mathur, the seasoned veteran, departing after building a legacy. It paints a picture of a firm, and perhaps even an entire industry, at a crossroads.
So we've got these two big departures seemingly pointing in different directions. What does it all mean for Elevation Capital? Are they going to double down on their existing strategy, or are they about to chart a new course?
Well, to answer that, we need to dig a little deeper into Elevation Capital's current portfolio and their recent investment activities. They launched their early-stage focused Fund 8 back in April 2022, which suggests they're actively looking for promising startups in their early stages of development.
Okay.
And we know that Agarwal, before his departure, was focused on early-stage investments in social, content, and commerce,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in the business-to-consumer space.
So is this a sign that they're going to continue down this path? Or could these departures signal a shift in focus, perhaps towards a different sector like fintech or health tech? I guess the big question is, who are they going to bring in to fill these roles, and what will their priorities be?
It's a million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's certainly possible they double down on their existing strengths,
Right.
seek even more innovative startups in social content and commerce.
Yeah.
I mean, after all, they've had some pretty impressive wins in that space.
Yeah, you can't forget about their investments in companies like Paytm, Swiggy, and Misho.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, those have become major players in their markets.
Huge.
So maybe they see this as a signal to go even deeper into those areas.
Yeah, that's true. It's a solid strategy. But on the other hand, though, we can't forget about the other side of the coin here.
Yeah.
The changing landscape of the VC world itself.
Right.
Remember those high-level departures we mentioned at other firms,
Yeah.
like Peak XV?
Uh-huh.
This suggests a broader trend.
Okay.
Potentially seasoned investors moving on to new ventures.
So could this actually be a good thing for the Indian startup ecosystem as a whole?
Potentially.
If experienced investors are kind of branching out, does that create space for new players to enter the market?
I think that's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
It's like shaking up a snow globe.
Right.
You know, things settle in a new pattern.
Right.
We might see new investment firms emerge with fresh strategies and priorities.
Right.
Maybe they'll be more focused on niche sectors or willing to take bigger risks. It could lead to a wider range of investment opportunities for startups, which is always a good thing.
It's almost like a changing of the guard, right? You've got the old guard, the established firms like Elevation Capital who have their playbook and their track record. And then you have this new wave of investors coming in, maybe with different perspectives, different approaches.
Exactly. And that dynamic tension, that push and pull between the established and the emerging,
Right.
that's what keeps the ecosystem vibrant, evolving.
Right.
It forces everyone to stay on their toes, to constantly innovate and adapt.
But what does this mean for the startups themselves? Is it a riskier environment now with so much change happening at the investor level?
I mean, risk is inherent in the startup world, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely.
It's always a gamble,
Yeah.
regardless of who's writing the checks.
Right.
But, this shift,
Yeah.
it could actually be beneficial for startups.
Okay.
A wider range of investors means more options,
Right.
more potential sources of funding, and maybe even better terms.
So instead of just pitching to the same handful of established firms, startups might have more opportunities to find investors who really understand their vision
Exactly.
and are willing to take a chance on them.
Precisely. It's all about finding the right fit.
Right.
And with more players in the game, the chances of finding that perfect match increase.
That makes sense. And what about specific sectors?
Yeah.
We talked about Elevation Capital's focus on social content and commerce.
Uh-huh.
Do you think those areas are going to remain hot?
I think consumer-facing tech will likely always be attractive, especially in a market like India,
Right.
with a rapidly growing middle class.
Yeah.
But we might also see increased interest in areas that haven't traditionally attracted as much VC funding in India.
You mean like deep tech, clean technology, even space exploration?
Exactly.
Areas where the potential impact is huge, but the risks are also higher.
Exactly. As the Indian startup ecosystem matures and investors become more comfortable with taking on more risk, we might see a greater willingness to back ventures in these emerging sectors.
Okay, so we've got all these moving pieces. High-level departures, new players entering the market, potential shifts in sector focus.
Yeah.
It all feels a bit like dot-controlled chaos.
That's a pretty apt description.
Yeah.
But chaos can be a catalyst for innovation. It forces everyone to adapt, to think differently, to push the boundaries of what's possible.
So even though there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding these recent developments, there's also a sense of excitement and optimism about what the future holds.
Absolutely. The Indian startup ecosystem is incredibly dynamic, resilient. It has a proven track record of weathering storms and emerging stronger. And I have no doubt that this current period of change will ultimately lead to even greater innovation and growth.
It's almost like we're witnessing a pivotal moment in the evolution of the Indian startup scene, and it's going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out.
Oh, it will be. And remember, we're not just talking about abstract market forces here.
Right.
We're talking about real people making real decisions that could have a lasting impact on the world.
So for all of you listening out there who are involved in the startup world, whether you're an entrepreneur, an investor, or simply an observer, now is the time to pay attention. The rules of the game are changing, and those who can adapt and seize the opportunities will be the ones who shape the future of the Indian startup story.
Well said. And for those who are simply interested in understanding this dynamic landscape, I encourage you to keep learning, keep asking questions, and stay engaged.
Now, before we get too carried away with the big picture, let's bring it back to Elevation Capital for a moment.
Okay.
We talk about their potential strategic shifts, their recent investments, and the broader trends at play.
Yeah.
But what about the human element?
You're talking about the individuals involved, their motivations, and their potential impact beyond their roles at Elevation Capital. It's an important aspect to consider.
Exactly. These departures aren't just about titles and positions. They're about people making career choices, pursuing their passions, and potentially shaping the future of the startup world in new and unexpected ways.
Like, take Mid Agarwal, for example.
Yeah.
He's got this incredibly diverse background, spanning social media, consumer tech, and venture capital.
Right.
What's his next move? Will he leverage his experience to build a groundbreaking startup, mentor the next generation of entrepreneurs, or maybe even dive into a completely different field?
And then there's Vivek Mathur. With his 14 years of experience at Elevation Capital, he has a deep understanding of the Indian startup ecosystem and a wealth of knowledge about building successful businesses. What will he do with all that expertise?
These are the kinds of questions that make this whole story so compelling. We're not just talking about abstract market forces.
Right.
We're talking about real people making real decisions that could have a lasting impact on the world.
It's a reminder that the startup ecosystem is ultimately driven by human ambition, ingenuity, and a desire to create something new and meaningful.
Absolutely. And while we can analyze trends and speculate about the future, the most exciting developments are often the ones we least expect.
So to all of you listening out there, keep your eyes peeled. The next big innovation, the next game-changing company, might come from someone who just stepped out of a familiar role and into the unknown.
And who knows? Maybe it will be inspired by the very changes we've been discussing today.
That's a great thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of venture capital and the evolving Indian startup scene.
As always, it's been a pleasure exploring these complex topics with you.
And to our listener, we encourage you to continue the conversation. Share your thoughts, insights, and predictions about the future of Elevation Capital and the Indian startup ecosystem. We're eager to hear what you think. So we've been talking about all these shakeups at Elevation Capital and what they could mean for the Indian startup scene. But it makes you wonder, what does this actually look like for the average person?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it gets to the heart of why these venture capital moves matter. On the surface, it seems like all this high finance chess games.
Right.
But the ripple effects are felt throughout the entire economy.
Yeah. So let's say you're someone in India with a great idea for a new business. How do these shifts in the VC world impact your chances of getting funding and making that dream a reality?
Well, I think if the trend of seasoned investors leaving these established firms continues, we could see more opportunities for new funds to pop up,
Okay.
especially those focused on specific niches.
Right.
That means that as an entrepreneur, you might have a wider pool of potential investors to pitch to,
Right.
increasing your odds of finding someone who really aligns with your vision.
That's interesting. It's almost like the barrier to entry for getting funding might be lowering a bit.
Potentially.
But wouldn't that also mean potentially dealing with less experienced investors?
Yeah.
Is that a good or bad thing for startups?
Yeah, I think that's a double-edged sword for sure.
Oh.
A less experienced investor might be more willing to take a chance on a novel idea, but they might also lack the deep knowledge and connections that someone like Vivek Mathur has accumulated over 14 years at Elevation Capital.
Right, so it's a trade-off. Potentially easier to get your foot in the door, but you might be missing out on the guidance and mentorship that a seasoned VC can provide.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here's where things get really fascinating.
Okay.
We're actually seeing a trend of these veteran investors, the ones leaving firms like Elevation Capital, becoming angel investors or advisors.
Okay.
So they're still active in the ecosystem, just in a different capacity.
So even if you don't get funding from their new venture, you could still potentially tap into their expertise and network through mentorship or advisory roles. That's pretty cool.
It is. It speaks to a maturing ecosystem where the lines between these traditional VC roles and startup involvement are blurring.
Yeah.
The knowledge isn't locked away in boardrooms anymore.
Right.
It's becoming more accessible to the next generation of entrepreneurs.
So for our listener who's dreaming of launching their own company, this shakeup at Elevation Capital and in the broader VC landscape isn't something to be intimidated by.
No.
It's actually a signal that things are opening up, that there are more pathways to success than ever before.
Absolutely. And it emphasizes the importance of being adaptable and proactive.
Right.
Don't just wait for opportunities to come to you.
Yeah.
Network build relationships, seek out mentors, and be ready to seize the moment when it arrives.
That's great advice for anyone, really, not just aspiring entrepreneurs. I mean, the world is changing fast, and being able to adapt is crucial for success in any field.
Couldn't agree more. And who knows, maybe one of our listeners will be the next Amit Agarwal launching a groundbreaking startup or even founding the next Elevation Capital. I mean, the possibilities are endless.
Well, on that inspiring note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
Great discussion.
We've unpacked a lot today.
Mhm.
Leadership changes, industry trends, the impact on startups, and even a bit of career advice.
It's been a pleasure exploring these complex topics with you as always.
And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has provided you with valuable insights and a fresh perspective on the ever-evolving world of venture capital and startups. Keep those articles coming, and we'll be here to help you make sense of it all.